All right, thank you so much, Hannah, for organizing this symposium and having me amongst all those great people here. I'm excited to present some recent work from my PhD. This is joint work together with Marina, Proft, and Rakoczy from University in Göttingen, as well as Jan Engelmann from Berkeley. And we're interested in the scope and limits of early explicit metacognition. So, explicit metacognition is the capacity to represent and reflect upon our states of knowledge, its sources, and its limits. So, when do young children develop the ability to provide those explicit metacognitive judgments about their own uncertainty? This is the main research question guiding my talk today. And prior research suggests that explicit metacognition develops very much in protracted ways. On one hand, a great body of literature shows that implicit forms of metacognitive sensitivity emerge very early. On the other hand, converging evidence from more direct tasks indicates that proper explicit metacognition might develop well into middle childhood. Most relevant for our purposes here are our findings from the so-called partial ignorance task. This critical test has yielded consistent evidence that children's ability to explicitly state their ignorance emerges late. In standard experiment child settings, participants see how the experimenter hides one of several objects inside a box, but they don't know which one exactly it was. And now when the experimenter asks them to whether they know which one she just put inside, they do not provide accurate metacognitive judgments until age 6. So younger children fail to acknowledge their own uncertainty in situations like these. They incorrectly claim to know which object is inside the box. However, this standard approach might appear pragmatically odd. The same experimenter hides one object and then proceeds to ask the children whether they know which one it was. This academic test question might seem a bit infelicious. Pragmatically, children may feel as if they were actually invited to guess whether they should know what is inside. Therefore, it could be that the standard partial ignorance task underestimates younger children's metacognitive competence. Theoretically, this lack of pragmatic relevance is in line with recent accounts that emphasize the social origins and social primacy of explicit metacognition. According to Nick Shea, Cecilia Hayes, and others, explicit metacognition is primarily for communication and coordination between agents. So individuals need to be able to share how certain they are, particularly in situations in which they coordinate on a joint goal. So an interesting ontogenetic prediction here is now that the earliest metacognitive competence should then also be observed in those contexts when children need to communicate their uncertainty to relevant others, and not when they privately think about their own thinking, and not much depends on it. So in our first set of studies, we test this prediction. Does the socio-communicative context enhance children's explicit metacognition? Oops. All right, so across 4 studies, we designed a new partial ignorance task that had much higher social and pragmatic relevance compared to the standard task. We tested 3- and 5-year-old children and variants of socio-pragmatic improvements. The main experimenter hid one of 3 animals inside this box. Depending on condition, children did or did not know which one it was. So in control conditions, when they sat in front of a transparent window, I don't know if you can see my mouse, so when they sat here, they would know which one it was, and in the crucial test conditions, as depicted here, they sat in front of a blurry or an opaque window, so they could not know which animal it was. Now, the key modification of our social partial ignorance task was that not the main experimenter asked the children to provide the metacognitive judgments, but instead a naive cooperation partner relied on children's help and therefore asked them the metacognitive test question. Here's a short video where you will also see the subtitles from the experimenter and the child. This is a 3-year-old in the crucial test condition of study 1, so she sits at the side of the box where she cannot know which one it is.
Kannst du mir sagen, welches Tier das ist?
Ich weiß es leider nicht.
So this is just one example. Here's another 3-year-old in the crucial test condition of a follow-up study with a more explicit test question.
Weißt du, welches Tier in der Box ist?
Ich sehe es gar nicht.
Okay.
Ich weiß es auch nicht.
where this one also kind of spontaneously provides some sort of reason for his not knowing. All right, in study 4, we followed up without the naive cooperation partner to control for the effects of general pragmatic enhancements in the specifics of our procedure and material. Here, the same experimenter asked the children after the hiding event. All right, what you can see here for our results is the probability of acknowledging ignorance across studies and conditions. As we were interested in the earliest explicit metacognition, and our 5-year-olds produced similar results, I focus on the 3-year-olds here today. And as expected, children did not express uncertainty in the control conditions. So when they knew which animal was hidden, they correctly said so. This comes to no surprise and is in line with prior research, which is good. Now, our main interesting question was whether the 3-year-olds would acknowledge their ignorance in the crucial test conditions. And in previous non-social studies, just to remind you, 3-year-olds did not. They would only succeed in about 20% of the trials. However, across our social studies 1 to 3, they did. So when they did not know which animal was put into the box and their cooperation partner asked them, children explicitly stated that they did not know. They expressed significantly more uncertainty in the test conditions, in about 60 to 80%, depending on study. Right, and to disentangle social from other pragmatic factors, we run study 4, and in this non-cooperative control, children appeared less proficient than in our social studies, but still performed better than in previous literature. Altogether, these studies find earlier explicit metacognitive competence under those conditions of higher social and pragmatic relevance. Already the 3-year-old children provided accurate judgments of their own uncertainty. They performed particularly well in the social cooperative version of the task, which is consistent with the social primacy account. However, besides the social relevance, there seem to be other pragmatic factors as well that might enhance children's performance here. Perhaps it has something to do with the contrast between noble and unknowable conditions as represented in our 3-sided box. Either way, these findings challenge the more conservative views on metacognitive development and indicate that explicit forms are present much earlier, already at age 3. All right, so far so good. We saw that children as 3 years of age demonstrate this spontaneous explicit metacognition. However, there's a however, 3-year-old children fail in conceptually very similar tasks that involve epistemic uncertainty in comparable ways. One example is the so-called 3-cups task, in which the experimenter hides one reward in box A, another reward in either box B or C. Participants can now make one choice, and strikingly, they fail to choose the certain option in convincingly systematic ways, right? So I think all of us know that, we have heard that before. And this is puzzling. These two tasks are conceptually very similar, yet there is this consistent evidence for the 3- and 4-year-old children's failure in model reasoning task as opposed to our earlier competence in the metacognitive case. So how may this puzzle be resolved? How robust is early explicit metacognition? When we compare the partial ignorance and the 3-cups task more closely, it becomes evident that the respective metacognitive judgments differ. For example, in the partial ignorance task, children provide local judgments of their uncertainty. They need to represent whether or not they know the contents of a single box. In the 3-cups task, however, this local judgment does not suffice. So here, children need to make a contrastive choice between certain versus uncertain alternatives. Furthermore, the content of these judgments differ. The contents are about different types of uncertainty. So in the partial ignorance task, children must represent what uncertainty about unknown identities, whereas in the 3-cups task, they represent where uncertainty about unknown locations of an object. And in the next set of studies, we try to systematically test for these differences and identify potential signature limits of our early explicit metacognition. So in study 5, we tested 3-year-olds in a mixed 2x2 design, again in a social context, similar to the one in our previous studies, which means that our children cooperated with a partner. Their joint goal was to collect farm animals. Children were randomly assigned to either a what or a where task, but all children received both types of judgment. The where task was basically a social 3-cups version, so children, but not the partner, observed the hiding of 2 identical animals. In parallel, the what task, children observed how one of two different animals was hidden inside a box. So here in box A, it was certainly a sheep. In box B, it was either a sheep or a pig, to have those in parallel. Now, for the local judgments, we had control and test trials. The naive partner pointed to the certain box or the uncertain boxes and asked, do you know which animal is here? Or respectively, do you know where the animal is? For the contrastive choices, the naive partner wanted to find a sheep and then asked the children, which box should we pick? All right. The results of our generalized linear mixed models showed a significant interaction between judgment and uncertainty types. I'll walk you through the figure. The layout is similar to what I presented earlier to guide you through. So we have the local judgments for what and where, uncertainty, and the contrastive choices below. And again, you can see here the proportion of ignorant statements. In the what task, children expressed significantly more uncertainty in the test than in the control conditions. Based on our prior studies, though, they seemed to express less uncertainty in the test and more uncertainty in the control conditions. In the where task, children expressed, again, significantly more uncertainty in tests compared to control conditions. They performed well in the control, but were still very overconfident in the test trials. So you see that they express significantly less uncertainty than in the what test trials. The overall interpretation gets more complex, though, with the contrastive choices, because here children's choices are descriptively comparable between conditions. However, they were significantly above a conservative chance level only for the where task. All in all, these results thus do not support any strong or straightforward interpretations right now. It does seem, so the data from the local judgments might indicate a nice symmetry between what and where uncertainty judgments, but from study 5 alone we cannot tell. There are at least two worries that limit interpretation. A, children perform surprisingly badly in the what control, and B, our local judgments are perhaps not purely local judgments. Let me remind you, so even though children were asked to provide only local judgments about either the certain or the uncertain case, they saw everything. So they were presented the certain and uncertain alternatives. Thus, the mere presence of alternatives might have made the local judgments somewhat contrastive in nature already. Hence, more minimal contrasts are needed to really be able to say anything about the what and where asymmetries. So this is what we did in study 6. We provide these truly local judgments in carefully matched control and test conditions. So in a within subtext design now, all children observed 2 trials per condition. Either for the what task, they were confronted with one box, 2 animals they did or did not see which one was hidden. For the where task, confronted with 2 boxes and 1 animal, they did or they did not know in which of the 2 boxes the animal was being hidden. And then again, our social partner asked them, do you know? All right, again, you can see here the proportion of ignorance acknowledgements across uncertainty types and conditions, and our model revealed a significant interaction. So children express significantly more uncertainty in both tests as compared to control conditions, but they were significantly better at judging their ignorance under what as opposed to under where uncertainty. They rarely acknowledge their uncertainty about the location of an object, so again about those 25% of trials, but in line with our studies, 1 to 4, they acknowledge their uncertainty about the identity of an unknown object in about 60% of the what trials. So this suggests that the early explicit metacognitive competence that we find in socially and pragmatically enhanced contexts is perhaps limited to the what judgments. Altogether, to quickly wrap up, these findings suggest that explicit metacognition may be emerging earlier than widely assumed, already at age 3 in our studies. It may be initially most prominent in socio-communicative contexts for socio-communicative usage. We find it in those contexts of high social and pragmatic relevance that might be necessary for young children to demonstrate their underlying capacities. Furthermore, we find that explicit metacognition may initially be restricted in scope. It seems that its applicability is limited to certain task formats, such that children may be able to locally acknowledge their uncertainty about a given situation, but have more difficulty in related tasks, those that require more contrastive decision-making between certain and uncertain alternatives. Also, we saw an asymmetry in the content of metacognitive evaluations, which is in line with some recent other evidence, some of which we heard about yesterday and today. So we saw this asymmetry such that young children appeared metacognitively competent in situations about unknown identities, but not locations. So as we have been discussing this a lot already throughout the days, I was super hyped about that. We have pressing open questions, I think. So one of them being whether these limitations present competence or performance limitations. If you follow generality constraints, you could argue that these asymmetries indicate competence limitations. We can only speak of true metacognition if it can be applied to different contexts, across domains, across task formats, and so on. On an alternative view, even domain general capacities could interact with domain-specific performance or specific task factors that might result in different performance limitations. Such specific limitations may perhaps then be overcome in more stepwise, more gradual development of conceptual capacities, metacognition in our case here. So we believe that future work should conceptually clarify and empirically test for these early scopes and limits of explicit metacognition in particular. And with that, I thank you for your attention, my collaborators, mentors, and colleagues, as well as participating children, their caregivers. And if you're interested or know somebody who might be, we have a new PhD position in our lab, so go check it out and join us in Göttingen. And thank you very much.